Bret Baier, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today.
You bet, Ben.
I know it's a very busy time when it comes to preparing for this final run to a midterm election, especially one that's as hot as this one. How do you survive and keep yourself mentally on track to follow everything at once, to pay attention to everything that's going on, having gone through so many of these?
Yeah, I think this is number 8 in the anchor chair, but so basically it's a big team effort. It is a massive effort to get across the finish line on election night. And it is one in which, it's essentially our Super Bowl. And you're right, there's a ton of things happening all at once, and folks are in our ears saying we're going to go from here to here, and we're going to call this and not call that. And it's very much free-flowing. But what happens is, as you're covering this election for Special Report and for the channel throughout the months leading up to this, there is a bit of osmosis, that you kind of have a good sense of where things are, who the players are, what the issues are. And added to that, we have a great team that provides a lot of data that's at our fingertips that we can kind of tap into real time on election night. So, yes, it's a lot of moving parts. You have to get yourself ready for it, but we're ready.
Just in terms of looking back at a previous experience, what's something that you've really gained about the preparation process, something that you do just naturally now to be aware of, a particular district or a particular dynamic, something that is below maybe the radar of the national news running into an election?
Yeah. First of all, I take Chad Pergram out to lunch, and we go over some of the real in-depth, in-the-weeds districts that he sees. He knows more about Congress than he's forgotten more about Congress than most people know. And so that gives you a perspective. But I also have traveled a little bit and gone out and talked to some of these folks in different districts. And that has helped me get a sense of, or just at least touching base in these different places to be able to talk to real people on the ground as opposed to looking at polls of what they say. I think we rely too much in the media on polls and not enough on where people are expressing themselves about what's important. And sometimes the polls miss that. I think they may have missed that in the beginning of this race. I think that it's starting to turn back really on these big issues. You were on Special Report not too long ago and said, this is looking like a bigger wave than people think it is. And I think it's a wave that broke late, but I think it's very possible that you may be right on election night.
Well, I'm always encouraged to hear that. I hope I'm right, typically, and not giving people bad guidance. I had Tom Bevan on, obviously another regular on Special Report just last week. And one of the things that he was talking about was their effort to compare prior polling misses to this current moment. And whether you're a fan of kind of doing that or not, I do think it's helpful to just sort of say, look, we know that some of these races, Nevada, for instance, Democrats tend to overperform, but in other cases, Republicans tend to overperform, particularly in the Midwest, where he identified a lot of misses. Do you feel like we have a conversation about elections that is too driven by polling numbers as opposed to conversations on the ground with people?
100%. And I think that was one of the lessons from 2016. I think I've told you this story that I took 37 Ubers in swing states, getting from place to place. And at the end of those conversations, I said, listen, if you're comfortable, can you tell me how you voted or how you're going to vote? And they said, sure. And 35 out of 37 said they voted for Trump. That was people of all demographics, all different backgrounds. That's something that was not in the polls that we were looking at in these swing states. In Philadelphia, as I, in 2016, was anchoring the coverage for the DNC in Philadelphia, as Hillary Clinton was getting the nomination, the union guys who set up the tent where we were said, hey, listen, they were wearing a shirt that said, I'm with her. And they said, hey, listen, Bret, I'm not with her, okay? And I said, okay, are you alone? And they took me to a lunch area, and 150 guys. He stands on the table. He says, hey, how many of you guys with her? No hands. How many of you guys with Trump? 150 hands. And I said, well, can I talk to you about that on camera? And he said, no, cannot, because I will get fired. But those kind of dynamics were not being picked up. And I learned from that election a lot. And I think we risk a lot when we rely on some other organization and how they poll people, because we're getting worse, not better, at getting polls right. We'll see how it comes this time, but that's how it's been the last 3 times.
One of the things that we saw in 2010 and obviously in 1994 before that was that in a wave election like this, there are a bunch of unexpected results, things that kind of come out of nowhere at the end, where you're surprised that someone ends up winning or someone ends up losing in a race that people didn't think was that close, maybe until the last few days. It seems like we're going through that dynamic again this time. I've had Republicans approach me on the street and say, ask about Washington State, ask about New Hampshire and the like. How seriously do you take those kinds of predictions when it comes to these waves? How do you prepare yourself to deal with them and to understand them, given that, for a lot of the assumptions that are based in Washington, something like that shouldn't happen, where the incumbent should have the natural advantage and be able to win?
I think, a lot of these things up until Election Day, you start to look at races that were lean Democrat that maybe are becoming more toss-ups. And you mentioned 2 of them, New Hampshire and Washington. Washington at one point was likely Democrat. I think it's lean Democrat now, but it's actually closing in the final days, as is New Hampshire. And so you start to get a sense, I think, before Tuesday, with a final gut check of races that potentially, if Republicans have more than a ripple, those are races that you might say go that way. I think what would be more surprising on election night is if Democrats, get the margin in the House to 10 or 12. That would be a bad night for Republicans looking at the current environment. I think a good night for Republicans is in the 20s in a House pickup, and a great night is in the 30s, and a ridiculous night is in the 40s. And that's not out of the realm of possibility. So when you go in, you've got this parameter, I think, that gives you a sense. Each race is different, though, as you know, Ben, and it comes while you can look at early races and say this could be indicative of a wave. There could be personalities and things that change and pickoffs that Democrats are able to make in individual races.
You've observed a number of White Houses, obviously, closely, and their media teams, the way that they approach the challenges of things like midterm elections. I confess that I am flabbergasted at the way that this White House has approached this midterm with, it seems to me, a message over the past couple of months that has been pretty consistent and really hasn't done much to protect a lot of Democrats in difficult, rural or evenly divided, or Trump adjacent, sort of lean right seats, and even their own sort of seats where Joe Biden prevailed, with some message better than essentially vote for us or democracy is at risk, vote for us or it means that you've given up on America, which seemed to be the kind of thing President Biden was saying just the other night. Why do you feel like this White House has approached it this way? Is there a better tactic that they could have taken over the past couple of months to maybe ride a little bit of that blue backlash wave that we saw post the Dobbs opinion?
I think when you started to see former President Obama, former President Clinton get on the trail and start talking about Social Security and Medicare, which is the classic, close for Democrats that Republicans are going to take it away or chop it or slash it. I think that message was late. They saw a giant hope electorally with the abortion ruling and thought that that's where they should put all the eggs in the basket. But the mode of the country, while that's very important, and I don't want to discount that in some races that it could make a big difference, I think that the economy and inflation obviously affects people when you're sitting at the kitchen table and you're saying, how are we going to make ends meet, and how are we going to pay for groceries? And I think that economic message is coming late. So I think the White House could have done that better. The messenger is also a problem for the White House, and the president's ability to deliver the message effectively, cogently, I think is in question in some of these events, which is why he's not getting invited to the swingiest of swing states. He's going to Maryland and New Mexico and places where they're a little bit safer. Mm-hmm. Lastly, I do think that this democracy pitch is one of the things that they're holding on to, because there has to be polling internally that shows them that it moves some. I will tell you anecdotally that I'm here in Miami. I talked to a lot of voters today. Most of this is trending red, even Hispanics in Miami-Dade County, which is really interesting to watch. But I did meet some voters who were Republican or independent, where that message about the threat to democracy actually resonated. And so you can think there has to be some data that backs some of this up. Otherwise, they're just throwing stuff against the wall. I saw a couple of interviews where that actually happened. At least they're paying attention to it.
One example of this obviously has to be former President Obama. Just the other day, Politico has a report out about his speech today, talking about Arizona and the lineup that they have there. And he gives a pretty, harsh message on saying, democracy is at risk if you elect these people and that kind of thing. But just as a newscaster, as someone who, has to cover this as it's happening, how are you going to respond? How do you plan to respond or prepare for it to inevitably, on election night, there's going to be some people who just don't accept the result, who don't, or who predict, some kind of inaccuracy or fraud or something like that. How do you deal with that in the moment when, the evidence that we would have for that is non-existent? There's no reporting to kind of go on. It's just a campaign's claim. But I feel like that's probably going to happen. Yeah,
I'm pretty sure it's going to happen, looking at our current environment. We're going to go, first of all, we're going to be cautious. We want to be first, obviously, but most importantly, we want to be right. Just for you, there's a lot of focus on Arizona and our call last time, as we were the only network that was out on that call. And as the numbers in Arizona were going from 80,000 spread to 10,000 spread, and there were people saying it was an early call. Just for the record, that call, the voting had ended. There were 70+% of the vote in, and the analytics for the decision desk had gotten to that call, and they made the call. There was concern about it as the margin shrunk, and, should we be with the other networks where they were in a safe territory, or should we be out where we were? We stuck by the call, and it was the right call. But it is also a lesson, and it provides us this, you want to factor in a lot of things about having enough raw vote total and making sure, we are transparent in the way that we make these calls, and so that the viewing audience understands where this is coming from. I don't think we're going to be making calls that are super tight, even if the voter analysis that is really, really good is suggesting that the spread is larger than we're looking at. I think it's going to be a cautious time, and there's going to be some races that won't get called on that night. The question is whether there are enough races to make a determination on the balance of power in the House and the Senate. And, looking at it now, it's possible that we could make those calls that night.
I think one of the things that you just said there that's so important is transparency, because I think a lot of people don't understand the challenge of making calls in an environment where you're dealing not with an election day, but an election month, where votes are coming in at certain times and you don't entirely know what the totals are going to be necessarily. It's not clear until you actually have that count. And for people viewing that at home, they view the chyron at the bottom with a red and a blue line as essentially being a scoreboard. And so they're shocked when they see a score shift in certain ways. Just in terms of helping people to understand what they're actually viewing, is there a way to go about that sort of lets them know, look, what you're seeing here is not necessarily reflective of even what the total vote is going to turn out to be in many of these states?
Yeah. We're going to do a much better job of that this time. I think I'm going to try to do that. We are probably going to, at the beginning of the night, lay it out more about how we make these determinations, how the decision desk gets to different calls. We have this voter analysis that is outside of exit polling. It's like supercharged. It's already in the field. It is a total of almost 500,000 voters, and you extrapolate in each state. It's a much bigger sample than any polling outfit you would ever see. And that, in addition to the raw vote total, in addition to what we know about different states, all factors in. We're going to try to lay that out and not get too wonky, but show people enough to say, this is where this decision is coming from. And if there's a reason that we're not making a call, we're going to call the decision desk guys on and say, why are we not making a call? Here's why. This county went blue X number of times. Bill hammer at the board, show us what this means. And we're going to try to get a little bit more granular because the audience is smart and we don't take that for granted. I think people enjoy that better than just hearing this is the call, this is not the call.
I completely agree. People are in it to a much more granular level than they ever were before. One question about the outcome. Let's assume for the sake of argument that Republicans do prevail when it comes to the House, that they do, perhaps narrowly win the Senate. So you've got a Majority Leader McConnell again, and you've got a Speaker, Kevin McCarthy, assuming everything goes according to his plans. There have been a number of Republican speakers swept in by midterm waves. You've known and interviewed many of them. And they are often not long for the haul after they do that.
Right.
We saw Newt's experience. We saw the John Boehner experience. We saw the Paul Ryan experience. What do you think the challenge is for Republicans who are going to be elected basically on a set of issues that they, tend to like, on border issues, on economy issues, inflation issues, crime issues, and the like? To be able to actually do something about things beyond just investigating Hunter Biden's laptop or something like that.
Yeah. So I think the reason Leader McCarthy went with the commitment to America was not really about campaigning or a brochure. It was more to get all of his members to sign on to an agenda, so that they have a blueprint, that there are going to be people on the fringes that say we should go for impeachment right now based on immigration, or we should go to, there's going to be all kinds of folks saying all kinds of things if and when they get control. And he will say, listen, we agreed to this. We're going to do this first, and we're going to have these investigations as well. I think there is, hope in a divided government that you could get to something where they actually make a negotiation with a president that would have to sign it, because you still have a veto pen in the White House, even if you have a House and Senate in Republican control. And while there will be investigations and there will be votes that go nowhere to set up political battles to come, the hope is that you could actually get some things that help the American people. For example, oil. Yeah. Or energy, or there's a number of fronts, immigration, that they could actually agree on, and get people in the Senate to sign on, not just Republicans but also Democrats. And but there will be those investigations, and I think he's listed a few of them. He said the border, Afghanistan, and something else, but it wasn't Hunter Biden. Hunter Biden will be in there, guaranteed.
A final question for you, Bret, just in terms of your own personal preparation for the amount of time that you're going to have to spend on the air and be coherent and be attentive and track everything. What is your level of caffeine that you typically take on an election night, and how do you take it?
Yeah.
Or do you just, do you sleep in in some kind of chamber for like 2 days to try to prep for it, like
chamber.
Some of these NFL players or something like that?
Yes, I do. I do drink a lot of caffeine on election night, and some Red Bull every now and then. But I do try to get an exercise in before that day. Elections are really good for me. I drop some LBs usually. And so I really need elections every 2 years to get my, body weight back in check. But I also think that those nights, the adrenaline does run heavy, and so it lasts for a long time. And you got to pace yourself because it probably is not just an election night; it's election several nights, and it's an awesome responsibility, and I love it. It's I take it as serious as we can, but we have a lot of fun with it too. I think the panel is going to be a lot of fun to be on election night in this moment when there are so many big things happening that affect people at home directly, and that's what we all really work for, is to be in the center of that seat.
Well, millions and millions of Americans will be tuning in, and I certainly appreciate your idea of an election-based diet approach. I could use that myself. So, thank you so much, Bret, for taking the time to join me today.
You bet, Ben.